Broadcasting live from Tech Square in Atlanta, Georgia, it's time for ATDC Radio, powered by Business RadioX. Now here's your host.
Welcome to ATDC Radio. Stone Peyton Lee Cantor here with you this morning, broadcasting live from here at ATDC. Lee, this is going to be a marvelous way to kick off the day. Please join me in welcoming to the program Head of Global Cyber Investigations for DEVCON, Mr. Michael Anaya. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, guys.
Well, Michael, before we get too far into things, tell us about DEVCON. How are you serving folks?
So DEVCON is a cybersecurity company. We do a number of things. The principal component that we do, think of an antivirus solution, but for the ad ecosystem, as well as we lend that security to all JavaScript that runs on a web page. So any JavaScript that you see on a web page, we essentially secure and lock down to make sure that no one gets infected with any type of malicious software.
And then, so you primarily, though, for the ad ecosystem?
Yep, that's our initial entry point, but now we're expanding into all JavaScript. So ads are a major component in JavaScript, but then also you're looking at chatbots, analytics, everything.
Anything that uses Java.
Exactly.
So now, tell me about how this began. Like, what made you target the ad ecosystem?
So essentially, it was a need that needed to be met. And so the founder and CEO, Maggie Louie, is the one who kind of came up with the idea. Her and Josh Summit, who's the current CTO, they basically came together, realized that this sector was underserved, and they decided to enter it.
And then, and your role in the company is more of the investigative side.
That's correct.
Things?
So then I basically head up whenever they identify something that they deem to be nefarious, and we think we can delve deeper into. I do that work. And I got this experience. Prior to joining DEVCON, I was a supervisory special agent with the FBI out of the Atlanta field office. So I did that I worked for the FBI about 14 years. And I spent my last 4 years here in Atlanta.
So now, educate the listener about kind of the mindset of the person who is doing this nefarious behavior. It's not like the kid in the basement anymore, right?
Right. Well, it could be. One of my subjects, funny story, you mentioned that he was the most prolific and the most brilliant hacker I've ever interacted with. He literally was a kid in his parents' basement. So your joke was spot on. He literally was that. But no, the mindset of the criminal, there's 4 components or characteristics that I've sort of observed during my time. I've done extensive amount of investigations in this arena, interrogations, interviews. So I was able to sort of see some patterns starting to emerge. So one key component is just justification. People will justify almost any action. I mean, you think about yourselves. Like, I like to give the analogy of speeding. Speeding is against the law, but we all do it, and we all find ways to justify it. So justification is one component that I've witnessed. Another component is just the idea of being able to having that prolonged exposure to activity is another aspect. So
they're around other people that are doing it.
Well, that's the 4th component, the environment.
The environment.
You jump ahead. No, the prolonged exposure, meaning, like, let's go back to speeding. That's a good analogy. When you think back when you were learning to drive at 16, you were terrified of the car that you were in, or 15, I guess, probably more likely. But as time progressed, you became more comfortable with it, and you decided to break the law and speed. And then the first time you did it, you probably were scared and nervous. And then after the 100th time of speeding, it's normal, right? You're just like, I don't even know why we need speed limits, right? They're
right, because the risk kind of goes away because you've never been caught. Nobody's ever stopped you from doing it.
So that's the same mentality the criminal mind they exhibited. The kid I was talking about, when we entered his parents' home, and found him in the basement, he was working on the 3rd iteration of the piece of malware. He'd been doing it for about 4 years, and he had no intention of stopping. So he never thought that, I'm going to stop. He never thought that was going to be something that he needed to do because he never got caught.
Right. But they know it's wrong and illegal.
They do to some degree, but they feel normal. It feels just kind of like where again, think about speeding. Everyone here knows it's wrong, but you do it, you justify your action. I need to get here because I'm running late. In his mind, when I chatted with him after the fact, I asked him, why did you pick the victim he picked? It was a wheel company. They were selling wheels online. And his justification was like, well, who needs wheels? Like, it's a frivolous business. It doesn't really matter. It wasn't as if I targeted a hospital or an organization that was doing good by society.
Right.
So he had in his mind kind of justified his action, right? And again, that prolonged exposure kind of helped in that endeavor. And then, another element you mentioned was the environment. So if you're surrounded by other people who are speeding and we're all joking about it casually, then we feel more normal. And we're like, it's not a big deal, right? We're all speeding, we're in speeds, and we just continue to do it. The final component is the lack of corrective action. So in all these analogies, or the speeding one, if think about back when you were 16, you got your license, you were speeding, no one caught you, but then all of a sudden you get pulled over and you get ticketed, that changes your behavior to some degree. And if that kept happening consistently, you probably would find yourself speeding less. So in the example I gave you with the kid in the basement, if law enforcement intervened at an earlier state of that person's life, he would have stopped sooner and wouldn't have progressed to levels that he was able to obtain.
So it's kind of that broken window kind of thinking in terms of crime, where like in a neighborhood, if you start kind of enforcing the smaller things, then that'll prevent some of the larger things happening down the road.
I guess in a way, that's kind of maybe the genesis of that idea. It's similar to that. It's just simply, in my mind, I think broken windows theory is sort of disproven now, and people don't necessarily accept that thought process. But I'm referring to more just our own individual actions. If someone intervenes, and just think about everyone listening can do this quietly in their own mind. You don't have to share with anyone. But think of the last time you did something wrong, and imagine someone caught you. In that moment, you'd be scared. You'd be like, oh my God, I can't believe someone caught me doing this. And there's a high probability you would stop. And especially when that person said, hey, stop doing this, otherwise there'll be more consequences.
But the parent in this case didn't know, or they were oblivious?
They're completely oblivious to what he was doing. Completely oblivious. They had no idea.
And was he doing things just to like kind of vandalize, or was he doing things where he was stealing money? Or
so in this instance, he wrote what is termed a botnet. So it's a robotic network. It was the first known peer-to-peer botnet. I don't want to get too granular with our listeners, but just know it's really complex and convoluted and very difficult to catch. And that's why he did it, because he didn't want to get caught. And he did it for the challenge. He wanted to push himself. There were other botnets around this time frame. They were what's termed command and control, so CNC. He needed to want to do that. He wanted to do something that no one has ever done before. So he created the first known peer-to-peer botnet. Did it for the challenge. What he was able to do was to infect the machine. He captured all your keystrokes. He captured all your key piece of information. When you entered a website, he would program, it's all automated. It would program to capture all your credential information, sent it in an encrypted fashion to a server that he controlled, and is self-propagating. So this piece of malware would continue to affect others and others and others and others and others and continue to grow indefinitely. And then he had all that rich data he captured, and he wasn't enterprising because he wasn't actually doing this to make money. He was just doing this to sort of do it, if you can believe it. And side note, when I presented this argument to a professor at University of Washington, he basically thought I was an idiot. In other words, he thought that there wasn't someone who was in the parents' basement. He thought it was a sophisticated Russian group operating out of Russia. He's like, there's no way that someone at the... Like
an individual could have pulled this off.
Exactly. He'd been researching this extensively. He's just, there's no way. This is ridiculous. There's no way that someone could have done this in their parents' basement. But anyway, so just to kind of give you some perspective, the capabilities that this individual had were huge, but he didn't exercise them. What he was doing is he was capturing all data, literally just capturing it and just picking out pieces of it and buying small pieces of electronics. He was, it's kind of crazy.
Because he was a kid.
He's a kid, right? Kids do. But it helped him because then we didn't, quote, throw the book at him. Right. And he wasn't sharing or propagating his malicious software with anyone else. He wasn't describing others.
What percentage of the criminals are that kid, and what percent are kind of these nation states that this is their way they're making revenue?
Well, that's an interesting question. So I would answer a little differently. The percentage of people like I described, whether they're a juvenile or a younger individual, depending on the crime, is a little bit higher. Because, example, they will go on like gamer forums and knock each other off. And that's how the hackers many times start in these arenas.
But at first, sometimes it's like a puzzle they're trying to figure out.
Yep.
And they're doing it just for hey, I was the first one to do that. So it's like kind of a monument to themselves in their world.
Exactly.
Right?
And
but then at some point, the bad guy's like, hey, that's pretty cool. I can use it this way. And then all of a sudden now they're using it to, really do some damage.
Exactly. Like there's kids out there, that's where they learn it. No one really does anything in terms of corrective behavior because no one really cares to do it. If you think that through my analogy and my examples of the lack of corrective action, there's no corrective action taking place. Then all of a sudden, this person continues to elevate their game because of prolonged exposure. Now they're really hacking and they become a criminal. Mm-hmm. At that stage, it's very different. So you have criminal element and you have the nation state. So those are the two. There are more criminal actors at large.
Like individual or loose-knit groups.
Or loose-knit or organized, depending on the organization itself. There's a huge array of different threat sets that are operating out there with different mindsets. But you have the criminal component, that's the largest, and then the smaller, but potentially more potent, is the nation-state. So nation-state are individuals who operate at the behest of a nation government. And the key governments that operate in this capacity, you're looking at Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. Those are the four, at least from the U.S. perspective, that they deem to be the most nefarious. From their vantage point, we are probably the most nefarious to them. It's all about perspective.
Right.
But so from the U.S. point of view, those are the big four.
And then in those cases, those are people that this is their profession. They're going into a building with a briefcase and whiteboarding. This is not fun and games.
Exactly. Nation state is a sophisticated operation. We don't really think of it in these terms, but their big threat, like I joked about it, is the U.S. If you look at the capabilities of all nations, the U.S. is probably the most capable of facilitating any type of cyber attack, just due to the amount of research and expertise that the U.S. has at large. So if you think about that, you have organizations like the NSA. So NSA specializes in signal intelligence. And many times that translates to also they do offensive operations for the U.S. at large. These are individuals who are highly educated, highly trained, sitting in a room where they're whiteboarding things. They do it full-time, 24/7. Nation-state actors have those same individuals doing the exact same thing.
Right, they're doing the opposite.
Right.
It's like they each have the opposite agenda.
Exactly.
So now, how does that kind of background inform your work where you are now?
So it helps me in terms of just understanding the mindset of that criminal element. And, I talked about blending of things, criminal element and nation state. Nation state, their mindsets are very different, right? Because if we were all nation state actors, we would not be deemed what we're doing is illegal. It's our job.
Right.
It's a very different world. But in terms of the criminal component, it helps me better understand the mindset, which helps me better identify when I see something at large, what could be nefarious versus errors or mistakes or whatnot.
So now at this level of knowledge that you have, is this something that you can see kind of at a glance like, okay, that's just a mistake. That's not really a big problem. So let's fix this. But that's not a bad guy just figured out something.
That's correct. So like an example, many times companies will false flags. And this happened many times when I was with the FBI, where a company initially said, hey, we had a breach, we got this major issue. You start looking at some of the tenets of what they describe, and there's indications that it could be a false positive. And so many times it happens, it's just an error someone made.
But you having that knowledge and that depth of knowledge and breadth of knowledge, you can kind of prevent your company from going down this rabbit hole.
Yep.
Right, where there could be a lot of hours of work to solve something that really is just a minor thing.
And that gets in, so we have some heated discussions internally about that. Yes, so I will be able to see whenever something surfaces, someone might say, this is something we need to dig deeper into, but based on my background and experience, I would then articulate, no, for the following reasons, we shouldn't. And that's where sometimes there is some discourse where we're discussing that, well, maybe we shouldn't, because a lot of times what we're doing in threat intelligence is having those discussions. Where do we spend our time?
Right. And that's where the value you're bringing to the organization.
That's correct.
Is to help them prioritize
the threats. And then I do, since it's a startup, I do a lot of other things.
Right.
I empty out the trash.
The glamorous startup world, right?
Super glamorous.
So now, how are you seeing the speed in which the bad guys, are they just getting better faster? Like what's the kind of what's the state of the union when it comes to the cybersecurity that you're seeing?
In terms of the threats, constantly evolving. And this is just very common for any criminal threat, or any threat. If you think like even burglary, if a burglar recognizes there's barriers to entry and they really want to get in your home, they'll try to find ways around it. Threat actors that operate in a cyber community are the exact same. If they recognize that there's barriers to entry, they'll think about it, they'll find ways to sort of circumvent them. So that's what they're doing. So when we start developing and evolving our technology to better protect our clients, they then will adapt. And that's just a constant cat and mouse game.
But it's like you mentioned, the burglary. Like as soon as those kind of video cameras on the doorbell started coming out, then the people were getting spotted and identified earlier on. So then they just start acclimating and then modifying their behavior to take that into account. Exactly.
So let's look at I don't want to give people ideas, but if you're criminally prior, know this, there's probably not a Ring camera on your back door, right? So, I mean, there is a way to circumvent it.
Right.
If you have motion sensors, there's probably not window sensors or motion sensors on your second floor. So there's ways around whatever security protocol you put in play.
Right. But then you have the bad guy's going to determine if it's worth their time or just find the low-hanging fruit somewhere else.
That's exactly right. So that's because you play my analogy out, you're like, okay, well, then you can never stop them. But what you hit home is what really happens. It's a cost-benefit analysis. They look at things like people in the business community look at, whether or not to do business or not, right? The cost-benefit analysis, that's exactly what they do. If your home is in a home in neighborhoods and everyone has a security camera installed and a sign that says they're protected by some company, but your house doesn't, your house will definitely be targeted.
Right. Because that's, again, the bad guy, this is their job.
Yep.
This is what they're thinking about.
I do a lot of presentations. And so one of the presentations I like to do is show people 4 homes and I ask them to pick which home they would break into. So it's kind of a fun activity. Everyone loves doing it. Unless you've been victimized.
That one of their homes is their home.
Exactly.
Then they don't like it as much.
They're like, sir, that is my home. Can you please not talk about it? So I walk them through this. And each time I have typically a larger group of people. And at the end, I ask them, show of hands, which one would target house 1, 2, 3, or 4. And we talk about all of them and their vulnerabilities that each present and opportunities. And they always, every single time, the whole audience always picks different targets. There's never been a moment where everyone's picked only one or not picked one.
It's never been unanimous.
No, because everyone has their own opinion. And that really goes back to a threat actor. So the threat actor thinks in the same capacity. You might think your company, you might sell cold cut meats. Well, no one's going to come after if I sell cold cut meats. Who cares about that? Well, unfortunately, someone does.
Right. There's a guy, I hate cold cut meat. I can't believe that they're still in business.
Exactly. Well, it's funny. You think about that. The analogy or the example I gave you earlier with the kid in the basement, he targeted a company that sold rims or wheels. They never thought that maybe some kid someday targeted them because they sold rims. Right, exactly. But anyway, so ultimately, everyone always picks one of those houses. And that really just goes to show that no matter how secure you are, people will find some value and some opportunity. So you definitely need to ensure there's a base or modicum level of protection that you're exhibiting.
Now, in that house analogy, is there one that for you it's the obvious one is number 2? That's it.
Well, no. At the end, I always tell them the intel, which is key in this whole game. I say, well, what if I told you house number 2, the owner was gone for a month in Europe, they forgot to turn on their alarm system, and they have $2 million of loose diamonds,
right?
And you have a diamond guy. That's different. It's intel. And all of a sudden, everyone's like, well, hold on, I would have picked. I'm going to change my vote.
Right.
And so, in essence, that is the same thing that deals in the cybersecurity arena. It's threat intelligence. So whenever the threat starts recognizing there's some vulnerabilities in play, and a lot of this is facilitated on a dark net, sharing information, sharing of opportunities. I'll give you an example. If you're a victim of ransomware, which is essentially a piece of malicious software that locks various files or important items that you have to pay the person to unlock, if you've been victimized by ransomware and you're not changing your computer architecture and bringing in new individuals to help you secure your network, that's a really bad indicator, because what happens is once you've been victimized, there's indication that people share that data with others.
They talk.
Right? And so it's like breaking into someone's home saying, hey, they don't have their alarm system on.
Right.
Well, then other people then will start doing the exact same thing.
Right.
So people talk.
And is there anything that people or companies can do to kind of protect themselves? Or are there some things that they're missing out on that to you is obvious?
Yeah, so I break it down to 5. I wrote an article about this. I break it down to 5 steps that all organizations, companies, private sector, public sector, it doesn't matter who you are. If you're an organization, you should do these 5 things. One is to build a team, and that's a team of cybersecurity experts. Now, the team, if you're a startup, like, you have 7 people, the team is potentially the CEO and maybe an outside consultant and maybe their chief technology officer. That's it, right? Mm-hmm. You don't have to be that formalized, but basically think about it. Think about, okay, what vulnerabilities are we putting in play? What can take us offline? If you're a fledgling organization and all of a sudden you get hit with ransomware, that could be it for you and you're done. So it's something to think about. Build a team. The next one is empower your team. Many times in organizations, they'll build a team, but they don't necessarily trust the people they selected. And so when the team comes in with recommendations, they're like, oh, go back. Give me something that's cheaper. And that's a discredit to that team, but also recognize that as an owner, CEO, or executive or leader, you need to build the team, but you also need to empower them to do their job. The third item there is layer security. So in the home analogy, there's a high probability that what you'll do if you have a home is you'll have a Nest camera. So that's one piece of security. It's one layer. You're going to have potentially a security service. That's another layer. You're going to probably educate your family. Don't answer the door when I'm not home to your children. That's education. It's creating awareness. That's another layer. So if you think that through, you're going to layer your security in your home. You need to do the same thing for your organization. You need to have a layered approach so that if the threat actor passes level 1, they don't pass level 2 or level 3 or etc. The fourth one is create awareness. So that's basically kind of go back to home is educating your family, having people in your company train them accordingly, make sure they know, hey, don't click on things you're not supposed to click on, allowing that empowering that security team to train your company and train your employees to make them smarter. Whenever I talk to, since I'm a former FBI agent, when I talk to current FBI agents or anyone who works in the cybersecurity arena, I always ask them kind of what's their biggest pain point. Many times it just comes back to the exact same thing, it's people. The biggest threat that most companies face are the people within, because they're the ones who receive an email and they're the ones who click on it. And when they click on those emails, all of a sudden that piece of malicious software is now exposed to their network. So it's educating.
So it's not necessarily them doing something
not nefarious purposely.
Like on purpose
exactly.
to sabotage it, just inadvertently or
inadvertently.
And now they're getting pretty good at these emails.
They are.
It's not like back in the day.
Exactly. Back when we were kids. No, but exactly. They're sophisticated. I even fall prey to them. I look at this email. I'm like, that was that? Let me click on that. Oh crap. But so yes, they're getting a lot better. But ultimately, it's creating that awareness. And then the fifth thing I always recommend organizations do is to share intel. So back to the home analogy, if you think about that, if you think of all of us living in a home, if we're part of a neighborhood watch, that's going to help prevent any type of individual coming into our home, breaking in, because we're sharing information. Mm-hmm. I'll share with you that, hey, this guy looks suspicious. And, you might share with me, hey, well, there's this lady who walks her dog every time at 9, and I know she doesn't live in our neighborhood. And we start talking. And then we start seeing suspicious behavior. Not only do we share with each other, but we'll then share with law enforcement. We'll call, we'll say we live in Atlanta PD. Hey, we have this suspicious behavior. Here are the patterns. That gives them some information so they can then send a patrol car or build a potential, because there might be other break-ins where that same fact pattern is at play that helps them further their investigation. So in the cyber arena, I encourage organizations to share amongst one another, but don't forget to share with law enforcement. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, no matter what we do to make our houses more secure, that threat actor is still out there. So we can't arrest them, but law enforcement can. So law enforcement needs to be brought in these cyber matters. And so you need to share with law enforcement, hey, here's some indicators of compromise. Here are things that we're seeing. And then they can then intervene and take care of that threat. So those are the 5 steps.
So now for your work at DEVCON, what's the pain that a DEVCON customer is having where they go, we should call DEVCON?
So basically, if you're looking at pain point there, is just all that JavaScript that's running on your webpage.
So if you have a lot of JavaScript?
Yeah. If any JavaScript. Any JavaScript. So back up a little bit, educate the listeners a little. JavaScript essentially is designed to run on your machine. So in other words, as opposed to a server.
So it's local on your device.
Yeah. So if let's say we all go to a company, we'll say New York Times, and we're seeing a bunch of content and there's JavaScript executing. That JavaScript is designed to execute on our browser. It's running on our machine. It's designed that way to basically save processing from that server that's hosting that content. So when it's running on our machine, there's a vulnerability there because it's outside the purview of that company. So New York Times doesn't necessarily know what's happening. That JavaScript initially is a bit of code that rests on New York Times website. There's a high probability that New York Times isn't monitoring that at all. So there's an active threat set that's termed MageCart. There are others out there, but this is one's a little more popular. What they do is they will attack that vulnerability. They'll repurpose that JavaScript to do something that it wasn't designed to do, such as maybe collect PII information, so personally identifiable information like social security number. Imagine going to a website and all of a sudden the chatbot pops up and it's asking you, hey, in order to verify your identity, please enter your date of birth, social security number. And you know, if you're on New York Times and you're a subscriber, you're like, okay, that makes sense.
They want me to do that.
Exactly. And then you do that, but in reality, that wasn't New York Times. It was this threat set. And that's where we block.
And that's through these ad networks a lot of the time?
Potentially, but this is just all JavaScript. So it doesn't have to be an ad network. So you're looking at, like, the example I gave was a chatbot. So that's completely outside the ad network. That's simply just JavaScript running. And there's legitimate chatbot companies out there that run them.
But like in an ad network, like any company could be, use an ad network, and all of a sudden the ad network isn't really part of the company. It's just kind of laying on top of their website.
Exactly. So
the ad is specific to me, and if you went to the same website, it would be specific to you. It wouldn't be the same ad. But so that might use JavaScript, and then once it does that, then they can locally get into my computer.
Potentially. So the way it works in the ad space, it doesn't typically work that way by the threat actors. What they'll typically do is redirect you to a site. You'll get like some sort of pop-up, and then or something that tells you like, hey, check this out. And right when you hit click, it'll redirect you to a site that they control. And that's where you're going to experience what's called a payload or the actual piece of malicious software. Mm-hmm. What you're describing, the ad network, that's how it works. A lot of people don't quite understand that, but it's called programmatic advertising. And it is just that when New York Times doesn't control, unless it's a direct ad placement, but if they're using programmatic advertising, which a vast majority of websites use, they have no optics into what ad you're seeing, because what you're saying is exactly correct. I'm going to see a different ad because of my preferences than my wife is going to see. Even though we go to the exact same website, those ads are all different and they're customized to the end user. So you're absolutely right.
And that requires local access in order to know the end user.
Exactly. So they're reading my cookies. All these sites are dropping things on our browser, and now that privacy is becoming more paramount, I think more and more people become more aware of these practices. But for the most part, it's completely under the rug. No one knows it. No one knows this is happening. Because, for the vast majority of our experiences, it doesn't really affect it.
Now, for you, are you going out and doing a lot of speaking and education?
So I am, yes. So, like example, I have a 6-part speaking series here with ATDC. I'm having my next session is going to be tomorrow at 2 to 3. I'm going to talk about the darknet. It's going to be actually very fascinating. So if anyone is interested in attending, I highly recommend it. My presentations, just to share with listeners, are very interactive. They're very back and forth. It's not all right, slide 400. We're going to look at this, right? So it's going to be engaging. I always involve the audience. I joke that if you're drinking a hot beverage like right now, I wouldn't necessarily bring that to the presentation because I'd make a lot of jokes. So you're probably going to spit it up and throw it everywhere. But it's I always try to educate and entertain. And so that's what I'll be doing. So that will be my second speaking gig, and then I have 4 more thereafter, about every 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Here at ATDC. Good stuff. And if somebody wants to connect with you or DEVCON, what's the coordinates?
So basically, you want to connect with DEVCON, it's DEVCONDETECT.com. The best way to connect with me is through LinkedIn. If you just type in my name, or even Google me, Michael F. D. Anaya.
And that's like the regular internet or the darknet. I'll be able to find you.
Don't Google me in the darknet. But no, I have some major SEO. But you got to spell my name right. It's so funny because when I was with the FBI, I had no idea what SEO was. I was like, I don't know what's that. That's stupid. But anyway, so no, that's how you find us. I'm also on Twitter, but I don't really use Twitter. I'm just mostly on LinkedIn.
Good stuff. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story.
I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Hey, man, stay with us. We're going to visit with one more guest, okay?
All right, sounds good.
All right. Next up on ATDC Radio, Lee, we have with us Assistant Director, Technology, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship with Invest Atlanta, Miss Amy Love. How are you?
Good morning.
So what did you learn in that last segment? Did we scare you?
I feel like much more secure now, and like I know what I need to do to be more secure. Let's put it that way.
That's awesome.
So tell us about your work at Invest Atlanta. What's going on over there?
Well, Invest Atlanta is essentially investing in the city of Atlanta's people through a variety of programs, including housing and community redevelopment, as well as business incentives. So I'm on the Business Incentives Economic Development team and represent, I like to call myself a concierge for the tech businesses and growth startups in Atlanta.
So now what, explain that in a little more detail. So like say I have a tech company here at ATDC and I'm ready to maybe graduate and go out into the world of Atlanta. I can get with you and you can help me locate in a better spot, or there's some tax advantages. Like what's the reason I'd be interacting with you?
We can help companies at any stage of their growth. So they don't have to just graduate from a program for us to be interested in supporting essentially their growth and hopefully the fact that they will stick around and do business in our city. So we are a quasi-government entity, and our board is chaired by the mayor of Atlanta, and we have city council representatives on our board, as well as appointed folks from the community, business community and otherwise. And they're sort of the oversight of these investments in the city. We always have an eye on how we can be more inclusive and make sure that we have equitable focus on how resources are distributed throughout the city of Atlanta. And soon we'll be launching what we are calling our economic mobility strategy in the spring. And this is just an effort for us to take a look at how the inputs and support from the city are impacting economic prosperity and growth for individuals.
So now walk me through how this would work. So I have a tech company, and then so I'm going to call you up and say, hey, I just want to educate you. This is what I'm doing.
Well, I guess in a lot of ways, I'm collecting threat intelligence, just trying to. So what are the what are the threats that our startup community and tech, our growth tech companies are experiencing, and how can the city, by way of Invest Atlanta and my role, how can we help get barriers out of the way for that growth? And we do have a toolkit. It's of resources that I can tell you about. But really, I think it's important to listen to what those threats are to the companies and, you know, the challenges they're facing and how we can help get barriers out of the way. For example, I know that in order to be a member here at ATDC, you have to be registered with the city of Atlanta with a business license. So how can we make that process a little more customer friendly? How can we take away the pain of having to register your business just so that you can become part of this community here at ATDC? So we work with the city on that, and in fact have a program to waive the fee for technology startups. I think there's a lot more opportunity there, and I'm always listening for ideas because in essence, I have to do customer discovery just as much as any company.
And in your case, customer discovery is just identifying these tech firms, these emerging tech firms?
Right, and talking with them about, finding out what their needs are and how they think that Invest Atlanta can be most effective. A lot of growing technology companies here are looking at real estate within the city as they grow. What are the resources available for them to find out where they can move as they expand? Where there are flexible rental arrangements or where the square footage per square foot fee is reasonable for a growing company. They're looking for tax credits, and we do take a look at the state opportunity zones, which offer tax credits for employees per employee for growing companies. So that also impacts where a company might want to expand or locate. We have, as an example, we worked with an ATDC company that had $300,000 pending on where that company was located in the city. And so we were able to be a resource to them.
And this is one of those things, they may not know what they don't know unless they have a conversation with somebody in Invest Atlanta. There could be opportunity for them. Hey, if you move 2 blocks here, this could open up, and that's an opportunity zone. and then there's some tax benefits from moving there rather than where you're thinking.
Correct. And I mean, in essence, we're always looking for the opportunity zones.
Right.
And I don't mean that in the literal way, but Atlanta is a growing city, and we have tech hubs in Buckhead and Midtown, and we have a burgeoning hub in downtown Atlanta. We have activity in south side of Atlanta, and there, as I'm sure many of the listeners read in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution over the weekend, Atlanta is a hub for Black tech, and we have a lot of talented African-American coders, engineers, and tech talent that is going to feed that, and leaders here in this community who are interested in really elevating Atlanta in that space and making sure that everyone can be successful.
Now, how do you work? You mentioned the Black Tech Hub that was mentioned in that article. What about any other underserved groups out there? Like, are you doing work like the refugee community in Clarkston? I don't know if that's still City of Atlanta or that's Clarkston.
I'm not aware of that level of engagement. I can say that we always have our eye on touching every community within the city, and we get out into the community as an organization. In fact, I mentioned the economic mobility strategy, and we are hosting public meetings where our staff will be there. We want to listen to the community and understand what they're struggling with and how our strategy can impact what they are experiencing and their success and growth and prosperity in the city. From my perspective, from the technology innovation entrepreneurship side, I am connecting in with as many partners as possible here in Atlanta, including ATDC, to make sure that we are paying attention to entrepreneurs from all backgrounds. And I can tell you that I get calls a lot from entrepreneurs interested in moving to Atlanta. So I just spoke yesterday with a fintech startup that's interested in moving here from another state. And so we can facilitate relationship building, access to resources, and really be the face of the city for these companies that are interested in locating in Atlanta. And they don't have to be startups. So we work a lot with established businesses and larger, as you know, larger tech companies. And when those projects come to us, we typically partner with groups like the Metro Atlanta Chamber and the Georgia Department of Economic Development on how we approach incentives packages and the discussion around recruiting.
Now, how do you find the level of collaboration here in Atlanta?
Well, I'll just tell you what this startup told me yesterday. This startup founder told me that he had not experienced such a welcoming community, and that he felt everyone was willing to meet with him, even at the last minute. He was excited once he landed in the city. He had been reading about the growth of fintech industry here. And once he landed here, he was surprised at the versatility in all the neighborhoods. And so I think that, and I can say in my first couple of months in this role at Invest Atlanta that partnerships are key. And I have had open doors across the board with groups like Atlanta Tech Village, ATDC, EI Squared here at Georgia Tech, the Russell Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, WeWork Labs. We've tried to connect in as much as possible to where the talent is hanging out. And I appreciate that our partners are giving us access to that so that we can assist as many technology companies as possible.
So now what's your vision? Like you said, you're kind of new to the role, but where do you think this could be in a few years?
I think that we, as an organization, have a real opportunity in the economic mobility space with technology. How can technology and startup thinking and innovative thinking impact the challenges that we see in our city? And a lot of people are already working on this, social and civic impact accelerators and programs. But I think with our talented students across the board, with all of the universities here and the innovation centers that these corporations are propping up, so the support from that corporate level, the university system, as well as all the brains around the talent in the startup community, I think that we'll see a convergence of solutions. And I think that I'd also like to see a new hub of activity in a new part of the city so that we take this tech innovation hub concept and just bring it south. We have seen Midtown change over the years, so I think it can happen in other places. And maybe it looks differently. Maybe it's tech plus civic innovation. Maybe it's really more of a focus on a certain industry. But I think that that's possible. And I think with redevelopment in downtown Atlanta, a lot of new projects coming on board and entrepreneurs willing to locate there and build these hubs, I think that we will see that. In the next few years.
Downtown was a center of gravity of the city, and then it kind of migrated north to Midtown. But I think you're right that there is this kind of revitalization with a lot of the effort of Georgia State University really creating kind of more reasons to go down there.
Correct.
So there is a lot of opportunity.
We have an innovation fellow from Georgia State. We run a program called Students to Startups that connects talented students in City of Atlanta universities to startup opportunities in the summer, and we subsidize those internships. And the startups in part subsidize those internships, but the talent in these universities is incredible, and we were excited to see with our Students to Startups program that we had applicants from every single school, including SCAD. And the majority from Clark Atlanta, Georgia Tech, and Georgia State.
Yeah, it's a lot of opportunity. And like you said, there's no shortage of people coming here. They're coming from all over. Yeah, the city just keeps expanding. So what do you need more of? How can we help you?
Well, I appreciate this opportunity to be here this morning because while the name Invest Atlanta may be known in the technology community, what we actually have to offer, I think, may be not so known. So I think this is a great assistance. And because my job is to serve the technology businesses in the city, and we want to make sure they stay here and they grow here and that we can enable that. Right.
Keep the brains here. If we're going to, kind of nurture them throughout the beginning of their lives, let's keep them here as long as we can.
That's right.
And opportunity will do that. So we appreciate you doing what you're doing. In your role now, tell us a little bit about your backstory. What got you here?
I'm a South Carolinian by birth and made a conscious choice to move to Atlanta to work for ATDC, as a matter of fact, several years ago. And had an incredible experience working for ATDC as the statewide program manager. I evangelized ATDC across the state of Georgia in mid-sized communities and tried to identify technology businesses that could use the support of the curriculum and resources here, and also hired part-time coaches in those communities to do the coaching and the teaching. And we grew the program in a short time. I had an incredible team, and I know that Ben Andrews is doing a great job to kind of keep furthering that program.
Keep the momentum going.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now, one of the, I think, challenges in your, a lot of groups in Atlanta, there's a lot of people doing kind of similar type work. Like you're trying to be the bridge and everybody's friend, like kind of to collect all of this resources.
Friend. No threat actors. Or
right. Because it seems like there's a lot of groups doing similar work in this space, and it gets confusing from the entrepreneur's standpoint of which, horse should I ride here?
Well, I think you're probably right. I think it's a good sign that there's a lot of activity. I think that's just the market speaking. I think that the activity that will be successful will survive and grow and show impact. There are great organizations like Startup Atlanta. Invest Atlanta is a founding sponsor of that organization, and I'm on the board, and I've just thoroughly enjoyed working with that group. They are truly the ecosystem glue, and keep an eye on what's happening within the ecosystem for startups. And I think the Chamber plays a really important role with their innovation efforts, and particularly the corporate innovation opportunities. So really and maybe your listeners can provide feedback to me later about what they think the most important role is for me. But I think that what I've noticed is that the deeper knowledge I have of the ecosystem and what each of these what each group is working on and their impact and their goals, the better I can direct resources. You might know about ATDC, but you might not know that they have the Educate program that takes very early idea entrepreneurs through a process that ultimately will give them a business plan and a financial model. Maybe you don't know that ATV has a special program for six-figure startups that have already got annual recurring revenue. So I think the more in-depth knowledge that Startup Atlanta can have and that Invest Atlanta through my role can have, the more we can direct people to the right resources.
Right. And that's because the entrepreneur, they're heads down just trying to survive a lot of times. They don't know who's who, what's what. And there could be a great resource for them. They just didn't even know. And they could be literally next door. I mean, we've seen that happen over and over again. It's just overwhelming from an entrepreneur standpoint.
Yes, there are some efforts in the city of Atlanta to create ecosystem maps, and Startup Atlanta actually does have a guide that can be downloaded from their website. There are other efforts around building mapping around companies and other resources beyond
and clusters,
talent.
like you mentioned, fintech. There's a cluster there. Healthcare IT. There's a cluster. Marketing automation, there's a cluster, there's all these things happening there. Just from an entrepreneur, I mean, we talk to entrepreneurs in all kinds of industries, so we see this firsthand. And a lot of times they're heads down, they don't know what's what. They're just trying to get a product out the door. So to know that there's resources, a lot of times we're telling them, hey, have you checked out this? Do you know Invest Atlanta can help you in there? Or ATDC has a lot of resources. They don't know. So
thank you for being an ambassador.
Well, I mean, we just see it. It's hard to be an entrepreneur.
It is hard. I think it's made to be glamorous these days.
Well, it's a lifestyle for some people. It's not.
Yeah. And there are different types of entrepreneurs, and I think Invest Atlanta serves all of them. We have small business focus. We have someone who's focused on creative industries, which includes gaming and film, and a large tech component there. I think we work with early stage and we work with growth stage, and I'm largely focused on the growth stage tech companies, but I will help any entrepreneur who comes my way.
Good stuff. So now if somebody wants to learn more and get a hold of you or the resources of Invest Atlanta, what are the coordinates? InvestAtlanta.com. And also can find me on LinkedIn, Amy Love. All right. Well, thank you so much for your work. It's important work, and we appreciate you coming and sharing your story.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right. This is Lee Cantor for Stone Payton. We will see you all next time on ATDC Radio.